I am seeing where there is a sense of complacency setting in, where people somehow are of the view that the pandemic is over. That is not the case, and I want to take this opportunity to again appeal to our Jamaicans to remember, observe the measures, wear your mask, do your hand sanitizing, do your social distancing, and just be very careful about your personal health and your own interactions. The pandemic is not over, as you would see in countries that are close to us, that their numbers are rising significantly. And it is, aside from the good management that we have given to the pandemic, but a lot has to do with your own personal responsibility and your faithfulness and consistency in observing the measures. And that has ensured that we have kept our numbers here low. We are now at 698 cases. I believe, Minister Tufton, we have had 2 new cases today. The green line that you are now seeing shows that we have had 553 persons who have recovered from COVID-19. The final line in this graph, which is the blue line, shows the number of active cases. That is the number of persons who still have the virus. Our recovery rate is now somewhere in the region of 79.2%. Now, the second graph would show the effect of controlled re-entry. That is the new numbers that we have brought in. The dashed purple line shows the number of cases excluding the positive cases from persons arriving under the controlled re-entry program. So in other words, if we didn't have the controlled re-entry program starting from somewhere around the 1st of June, that would be our numbers, 535 thereabout. But of course, that is not an option for us. We must bring home our Jamaicans. That is just for illustrative purposes to see that if there were no re-entry, that our curve would be essentially flat, which would mean that we have essentially brought under control the spread of the virus locally. Now, curfews. The day to next day, night to early morning curfews will continue in place, starting now at 11 p.m. on the night of June 30th, 2020, to 5 a.m. July 1, 2020, day to day, until 5 a.m. on the morning of July 31st, 2020. Licensed public passenger transport, whether or not they're state or privately operated, are allowed 1 hour after the end of curfew. So as of Wednesday night, July 1, that will now be between 11 p.m. and 12 midnight until the 31st of July 2020. And they will be allowed to travel home from their last passenger drop-off. And they would have 1 hour before the beginning of curfews. That would be between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. until July 31st, 2020, to travel to their first passenger pickup. Of course, no passenger must be transported in their vehicles during the additional 1 hour periods allowed for transport operators to travel to and from their homes. In terms of gatherings, gatherings are not to exceed 20 persons, and this will apply up to July 14th, 2020. In terms of the operating hours of markets and vending in public arcades and public transportation centers, these will now be as follows. Mondays to Saturdays, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. You will recall that they were Mondays to Saturdays, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We have now added an additional hour. Markets will remain closed on Sundays. In terms of zoos and parks, the opening hours are now 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for zoos. And for parks, including theme parks, this would be 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Note that water parks and attractions remain closed. Now, daycare and nurseries. This is a big issue. We spent some time last week discussing them. The Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Education, and we are expecting that by our next press conference, we should be able to have some protocols as to how we would treat with the reopening of daycare nurseries. Very important as people go back to work. And now I want to give you an update on the controlled re-entry of Jamaicans. The latest number from the JamCOVID site and the Visit Jamaica site, this would be, we have processed now approximately 31,000 applications for Jamaicans and visitors who want to come to Jamaica. 23,000 are residents, meaning Jamaicans who are coming back home, and non-Jamaicans who live in Jamaica. And 8,000 are non-residents, visitors, tourists. Approximately 14,600 persons have arrived in Jamaica since we have put in the controlled re-entry program. 9,300 are residents, meaning Jamaicans who live here and non-Jamaicans who reside here. And 5,300 are non-residents, meaning tourists, Jamaicans who are visiting, and non-Jamaicans who are Jamaicans who come here to visit. Now, an additional 15,000 persons have been approved to travel. 12,400 are residents, meaning Jamaicans and non-Jamaicans who reside here, and 2,600 are non-residents. So in that number would be some tourists who would be coming, or most of that number would be tourists. Now, during June, we had an average of 5 flights and about 410 passengers arriving per day. For July, our projections are, well, these are not projections. These are what we expect by virtue of the flight schedules that we are now seeing. We're going to be expecting an average of 22 flights and 1,680 passengers per day. So as of July 1, 2020, we will still require testing for controlled entry. However, since the commencement of controlled re-entry on June 1, we now have the benefit of testing for over a month, and we now know the positive rate, 0.7%. Therefore, we can now reconfigure the protocol surrounding controlled entry into Jamaica at our airports. This will allow us to more efficiently utilize our limited resources for testing and surveillance, both for ports and intra-island at our health centers and other health facilities. So all arriving passengers would still be subject to a health screening and risk assessment on arrival at the port of entry. Visitors to Jamaica from areas declared as high risk at this time by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, so areas such as Florida, New York, Arizona, and Texas, those are considered now high risk. So persons registering to visit Jamaica on the Visit Jamaica website, coming from these areas, as of July 1, will be required to upload a valid PCR test, which must be no more than 7 days old from the expected date of their arrival. Now, approval for travel to Jamaica on the Visit Jamaica website will be subject to the upload of this valid PCR test. As of July 10, persons visiting Jamaica, that is a non-resident visiting Jamaica from the declared high-risk areas will be required to present their PCR test.